Just before I start off, there's quite a lot of material to go through, and I'll go quite quickly to leave enough time for questions and some dialogue after my presentation. If you have any remarks, comments, I have put some slide numbers on each slide, so maybe take note. If you have a question about specific, maybe take also note of the slide number. That will help for future reference. The last couple of years I've worked in property companies before joining RPS, and I came across an interesting property development called Ocean Tower in Texas on South Padre Island. This was projected and promised to be absolutely the best investment, as a second home. Beautiful sea views, access to the beach, fantastic located, it's near the Mexican border, absolutely premium finishing. However, the reality became very much differently, because during the foundation they really discovered some massive issues with the foundation, and after a year they gave up and they had to demolish the building. You're probably wondering, what has this got to do with data management? A pet subject of mine is that there's still so much hype about big data, about the importance of 360-degree view and all the tools, all the vendors just promising the earth. There's a heavy focus on what AI, machine learning can do in analytics and in personal and business life. A lot of big promises, and yes, I agree, massive opportunities. But also the reality is that a lot of these are failing. They are not delivering what they intend to deliver. There is research from Gartner that you may be familiar with that 85% of big data strategies are indeed failing. There is the cost of bad data, which was well articulated and studied in an IBM study 3 years ago. Harvard Business Review, loads of articles from prominent data experts around while companies are failing to become data-driven. And in my view, the root causes can be assigned to two camps. There is the organizational management issues, where companies clearly are not asking the right questions, they're solving the wrong problem, they're definitely not ready, there's cultural resistance, they lack good clarity on business case, return on investment, but also many issues result from the data capability issues, from not having the right data foundation. And what I want to touch this afternoon on is the importance of investing and spending enough time on building a good foundation, because without a strong foundation, your projects are bound to fail. And if you think about where we currently are in the world, data management cannot really afford or be seen as failing, because the continuous digitalization of personal life and business life results in a massive amount of data, and that's not going to go away. An IDC study showed that they expect the growth rate of data to go from 33 zettabytes to 175 in the next 5 years. And the result of all this data, combined with ever cheaper computing power, cloud technology, has resulted in a lot of small business starting up and challenging existing players in their market. And that's also the case for my company. In many of our markets, we are getting challenged by startups, by small business who are agile, don't have all the legacy, they are nimble, because they can do things they could never do in the past. Because machine learning, AI is nothing new. 30, 40 years ago, there was machine learning, but it was only reserved to universities, to big companies, because of the effort and resources it took. Consumers continue to be addicted to data, and especially the younger generation. I've got a 14-year-old daughter in home, and they love data, they love their mobile devices, and they have more and more expectations. And it is my daughter in 10, 15 years time who's going to be the purchasing of professional services in my case, or who are going to be your future buyers, your future consumers. And therefore, I'm a strong believer that it ultimately ends up as a survival of the data fittest. Data capability will become a key differentiator. And it is my strong belief that any business, whether you're small or large, whether you're in healthcare or in retail or in professional services, whether you are even for profit or not for profit, your future existence and success will increasingly depend on how good you are in collecting, processing, and delivering business value from data rapidly and at scale. And that's also the case for RPS Group. And the rest of the presentation, I would like to share some of the work I'm doing at RPS, based and some of my findings, my lessons learned that hopefully will be of use to you in your context. RPS is a global professional service firm. We employ about 5,000 people operating in 125 countries. Doesn't mean we have 125 offices. We have about 50 offices scattered predominantly in the States, Europe, and Australia. But we have a lot of satellite offices, partners working in all different countries. All our activity are split in 6 sectors. Each sector has its own CEO, and we have 12 service clusters. This looks quite straightforward, but the reality is that we have a lot of duplicate services in the sectors, run in geographically different locations, and all run separately as different business units. So there's quite a lot of complexity missing from this slide. In reality, it's a very fragmented business. I joined RPS about a year ago as the first generation Chief Data Officer. I know it's a grand title, Chief Data Officer, but the reality, as you will hear, is it's quite different. But ultimately, I'm responsible for making data work for RPS. So my brief was really about help us to get the best out of our data by making sure we put the right processes, technology, and capabilities in place. And I started with a blank canvas, quite refreshing. This is the first time I end up in a new job with nobody to manage, no teams, no resources. I did have a budget for 4 resources before the end of last financial year. And because I landed just at the start of a strategic planning process for developing the company's 3-year strategy as well as the budget for this financial year, I have basically had no time whatsoever to really familiarize myself with the environment. I had to immediately get into planning mode, which I'll talk to you about in a second. So just for your information, the type of responsibilities that I've got is around data protection, compliance, the usual GDPR and other local compliance matters, data architecture and data engineering, the reporting infrastructure for global systems, especially not for the local fragmented operational systems. I'm responsible for identifying new business opportunities, data-driven digital innovation opportunities, and also leading on data governance. But I see myself more as a data evangelist, as evangelizing the importance of data management, demonstrating the art of the possible, helping people to think differently how they look at data. I also see myself as a translator. My background is not IT, it's business. I walk backwards into the IT and the data space, which is actually not a bad thing for a data leader, because first and foremost, my focus is around driving business value. And often my role is about translating, because a language spoken in IT is significantly different than what's spoken in the business. And often, historically, there's been a lot of mismatch and a lot of confusion because of not translating one into the other. And I would argue that my role is to make sure that business opportunities get translated into what that means in terms of technology and data capabilities, and also to translate what technology and data can do to the business. And finally, I also see myself as a change champion, especially in this organization, which comes from a very different background than many organizations. And as a result, a lot of what I do is about changing behaviors, changing perceptions. Let me quickly summarize what the current data landscape is looking like. Because we've grown through acquisitions, and yes, we have acquired over 30 businesses in the last 15 years, I'm facing a very fragmented data and technology infrastructure, because until 2 years ago, the previous CEO, his mantra was, we acquire a business for a specific purpose and we leave it to perform it as it is. We don't integrate much, we don't create synergies. It kept all the businesses separate. The new CEO now is completely changing that, and the whole focus is on one RPS, on synergies, creating economies of scale and looking at the tech infrastructure. As a result, I'm facing a very diverse and siloed business, and although at the moment the whole strategy is about working closer together, old habits die hard. I'm still facing colleagues who have been for 20 years been used to work in their own bubble, not having to worry about any central functions, just working with their colleagues in their legacy system. And now suddenly they've got somebody from the central IT function with the title CDO knocking on their door and asking them to change the way they work. There's also a significant varying degree of data maturity. as you can imagine. Some parts of the business are really advanced. Others are still collecting data in paper format. There's no global data management system at the moment, although we just started the process of rolling one out for finance. That also means taking a group view or getting a group view is extremely hard and time consuming. And most of the work delivered to clients is considered as projects. And as a result, there's zillions of project folders with limited documentation, not easy accessible. When the project finishes, they pack it up and archive it without realizing that some of the data in there could be of use for future projects. So we have 3 project managers working in the same geographical area using common geolocation data, but not sharing it. They're not aware that they work in the same vicinity because they're so used to deal with in a siloed way. And we have a lot of data, a lot of scientists, subject matter experts, but they're not data experts. They think they are. There's also many opportunities. We are starting to roll out global data management systems, providing a good opportunity to introduce better data foundation. The competitors are helping me a lot because I don't have to sell too hard why the company needs to consider advanced analytics and AI and do things differently and embed more data in its services, because the competitors are forcing us to do so. Clients are asking for it. There's loads of synergies and economies of scale possible across the group because there's so many different pools of data that if you combine it can mean so much more than the individual parts. And we have some of the best scientists and domain experts. I mean, one day I could be talking to our anti-mine unit where we have some of the world's leading mine experts. We've got, the ocean scientists in Perth, where they develop measure equipment that goes into the ocean to measure wave height and temperature. We have some of the world's leading tsunami experts working for us. So it's fantastic, some of the people that you meet in this organization. So there's no shortage of what to do with data. There's no shortage of domain expertise. What also helps my job is that the board, the senior leadership team, gets the message about the importance of data, because the vision for RPS has been upgraded from to be the best mid-sized consulting firm to being the next generation consulting firm that leverages data and modern digital age technology. And when I came on board, the challenge was within a short time frame to decide which direction with minimal information. And very quickly, I had to balance out 2 different options. One was, do I go for a wide strategic big bang perfect approach where I set out a strategy and I build a big central resource pool and I drive everything from the core? Or should I actually start more with a narrow focus, looking at tactical opportunities, using local resources and local involvement, and do it incrementally and focusing on making progress, stuff that's good enough, not perfect? And my gut feel, my experience, really guided me towards balancing my resources more towards a more narrow tactical focus and strategic focus. And you probably, hopefully, will agree, because I'm sure in your respective roles you have to make these calls as well. So how much time do you spend on strategy? How much on the here and now? But I'm a great believer that you need to prove yourself by delivering value. It's the problems here now that will keep the business afloat, that will move the business forward, not what can happen in 3 years' time. But I'm not saying strategic approach is not suitable. You need to have a balance. But in my situation, given the context of the company, the diversity, where it came from, I have a feeling that taking a central big bang approach is not going to generate much progress in the short term. So the process I went to then is setting and agreeing a vision, and that's really important for all of us, that setting where you're heading, your direction, what you're trying to achieve, and bringing that to life, showing what the organization could look like, if you have all this capability. I then developed a data management capability, which I will take you through in a minute, tailored to RPS, which is articulating, okay, what does good look like from a data point of view? It's partly educating and partly obviously planning to move towards our vision. I also very quickly assessed the level of maturity across the business units to identify, who is more or less there or not. And then I developed a 3-year pathway and a delivery plan based on data maturity, the risk and issues that currently these units are facing, and the go-to-market plans, and then developed an operating model. In terms of the operating model, the company was very much decentralized. And the downside of decentralized model is that you duplicate a lot of skills, there's lack of consistencies, lack of standards, and therefore, very often there's a trend towards a centralized BI model. And that's also what my experience has been to date. It's mostly putting centralized teams in place to deal with analytics, reporting, data management. However, it's also not really perfect, because you often become a bottleneck, because how you do start prioritizing, if everybody shouts at the same time, on what basis you can try to follow strategic priorities and the business opportunities, but in reality it's sometimes very hard. And also you lack responsiveness, you lack the engagement at the local level with the business subject matter experts. So it won't be a surprise to you that the model I'm actually putting in place in RPS is a hybrid BI, a center of excellence model, which in my view combines best of both worlds. It's making analytics an enterprise capability, so embedding it on the outside of the organization, but also at the same time having a strong core where you manage the complex infrastructure and where you drive some of the standardization from. In reality, what that looks like, I've got an 8-strong central team, which focuses on the data engineering, data architectural, data quality management, data governance. And then they are supported in the business by data specialists. And these are existing roles I have identified, either by coincidence or by asking around and then looking how things are done. Roles that are predominantly focusing on data management tasks or analysis. And I create a dotted line between them and my team, make sure they are supported, but they are the front line for the end users. So end users, we are more and more pushing self-service tools to them for them to self-help. But their first point of contact is the data specialist within their business functions, where they can commission reports, dashboards. And data specialists operate what we call freedom within a framework. They have a lot of freedom, but they still have to comply to some of the standards that I'm have put in place, or my team is putting in place. And then we've got external partners that we partner with for some specialist skills. It doesn't make sense to hire full-time resources when you only need it for 2-3 months. So that's the kind of the operating model, and hopefully give you a little bit of a flavor of what that looks like. So the vision and the strategy is all around focus, and my team, as well as data management and general RPS, has one focus, which is all about building a center of excellence by 2022. And how are we going to do that? We're going to do that by building a global data foundation, which I'll take you in more detail after this slide. We are also looking at creating and delivering data services to the wider group, providing a platform to grow data science capability, and focusing on improving data maturity and data skills across a group, really driving a data culture. And why we're doing this is ultimately to help RPS leverage value from data better, but most importantly, it's all about delivering either efficiencies, reducing business risk, increasing revenue growth, or improving client experience. And the last point is really important, and to kind of bring that to life, what that feels like in my team. All of my team members have clear objectives and targets around these. We even have a central spreadsheet where when certain work is delivered, we have a feedback loop with whoever we delivered it to in the business. But we also have a spreadsheet where we capture every single deliverable, in which category it fits, and quantify what the impact has been to the business. Because I have learned from my past mistakes where in previous roles that I had, I was not necessarily that very good in articulating the value I was bringing to the business. I was very good in developing KPIs and performance management frameworks for the rest of the organization, but I didn't have my own ship in top shape when it came to demonstrating the value. So I've learned out of that, and that's why I'm now really, really focusing on making sure that the team spends their time on stuff that's worthwhile. If they do something today which is not helping and contribute to any of these 4 objectives, they are then wasting their time, and they know this. Any data leader needs to be really, really careful in terms of how it's aligned its activities, and it's absolutely crucial from my point of view that what you do and how you deploy your resources as a data leader is directly driven from your business strategy. And that sounds very obvious. However, I have arrived in previous jobs in situations where when I looked at the history of the team I inherited and the function I inherited, that has not always been the case, where clearly the agenda was divergent from the business agenda, getting distracted by the shiny tools, by everything that could be possible, and doing stuff which bears no resemblance with the direction of travel. It does happen, trust me. So ultimately, my data strategy is quite simple. My data strategy is all about how I'm going to put the data management capabilities in place to help the business meet its business objectives. And it's all about turning opportunities, turning issues, into a data, and then driving the business value. And I use the concept of the data value chain because I feel this is a good, easy way to explain to non-data about what it takes, to drive value from data. It's about making sure we have processes in place, a capability to capture data, to collect it, that we have access, and we also maximize use of external data sources, because this company is very good in looking internally, but not always considering all the freely available external data sources that could enhance our own data pool. Then it's about data enrichment and management. And then finally, it's about turning that data into something that drives business value, is a consumption, making it ready for consumption, whether it's through analytics, reporting, or machine learning, data science solutions. So my remit and my team's remit is all about trying to reduce the time to insight and value creation, is keeping that value chain as short as possible and running any opportunities as quickly as possible through this. So let me now kind of explain a little bit of how I look at data management capability. And again, I don't think this is any rocket science. It's based on my experience reading up on other data management capabilities, but more importantly, I've tried to come up with something that works for me, that works for RPS. So I don't think you will see many surprises in here. The first data management capability is around data governance and compliance. Why is this important to RPS? Well, at the moment, there is no data governance, no clarity on data ownership, and this becomes painful in the context of system rollout, global system rollout, because some decisions are going to be made which will have a massive wide impact. So we need to make sure that those decisions are made holistically and with the right people on board. Because we are a global organization, it's not just GDPR I have to care about. It's also about the California Consumer Act. It's about tracking what's going on in Australia and some of the changes on the horizon. It's about Asia. So it becomes quite complicated to also meet the wider global data compliance agenda. And the approach I'm taking here won't come as a surprise, is obviously building a data governance framework. But I guess what's different from what I've done in the past, instead of going for a big bang approach again and splitting up the data in data domains and having a data steering group for customer data, for project, for finance, I'm focusing here first and foremost on where the need is first. So at the moment, there's a massive concern around the new finance system and about the definitions and some of the decisions. So I'm literally in the process of the next couple of weeks to set up the first data steering group for finance and project accounting, which will be holistically approached and will have cross representation from other functions like HR, payroll, and obviously finance and the business. But it has a clear purpose and a clear terms of reference. Yes, that it's normally good practice to set up one for each data domain, to have a data governance council sitting on top of that, and that will come over time. But I don't have the resources, and nor can I demonstrate value enough by doing a big bang approach. So I'm being very pragmatic here. The key challenge for me is about governance and the word governance, and that most of the people, when you start talking about data governance, they really quickly turn away and pretend they have some important message on their mobile phone, or they have to race off somewhere else. And it would be good to hear from you in the Q&A session whether any of you have been successfully trying to get buy-in data governance by changing some of the wording. I've been thinking myself, what else could I call it? But I'm not the most creative soul, so I would value some of the feedback and input from you guys. The next one is data inventory. Any business needs to make sure it has got a good understanding and a good handle on what data you actually have. What is yours? What are you processing on behalf of others? What else can you have access to? And more importantly, how you define that, making sure you have a common vocabulary. At the moment in RPS, there's no such a thing as a data catalog. We have done a lot of developments with minimal data documentation, And we are now starting the journey of acquiring a data catalog and a metadata solution to start a process of populating this. And here, what's important, I'm going to rely on data governance framework to help populating that, because ultimately data is owned by the business. It needs to define the way it is fit for purpose. And also, again, you will hear the word very often, pragmatic approach. You can spend and waste a lot of time trying to define every single entity, every single attribute, but what's the point? Focus on those that are most commonly used, where there's most risk of confusion, and what matters. Don't try to overgo boards, because it's very time consuming, it's boring putting a data inventory together. And to be honest, it's one of the hardest areas to justify the return on investment, because I need people to help me in the business, but they are also targeted on their utilization rate. As a professional service, most of the people I have to work with around business, they have 90 or 85% utilization targets. That means 85% of the time needs to be charged back to a client project. And if I come and knock on their door and ask them to spend days and days on helping me to define their data, I don't have to tell you what the most likely answer is going to be. The third aspect is data platform, data architecture. Every company needs to have the ability to quickly bring data together, because data is rarely perfect in the source system. I've never come across any organization that can honestly say that we have 3 systems, manage all our data there, we don't do any transformation, we get everything out of it that we need. Very often you need to have the ability to blend data, to enhance it, to append other stuff, to correct it, and to structure in such a way you can drive value very quickly. Believe it or not, after all the acquisitions, I have still not found any active BI modern data warehouse environment in the whole of RPS, which is amazing, because I thought there must be somewhere something that we acquired in the past that had already a data warehouse in play. No, it's all application by application, very fragmented and on-prem. So my approach here and my priority, and it's good to say that 2 weeks ago we finally have our Azure Modern Data Warehouse environment set up, and we're running 2 proof of concepts through it. We're also adopting DevOps. You may be familiar with the DevOps movement, but it's all about merging the development operations and do a joint development. Cloud migration, absolutely essential, because we need to get away from on-prem. It's not flexible, it's not agile enough, it's not scalable enough. Cost absolutely a lot. And we also are developing what we call scenario-based data architecture standards, which means that when we get requests to help the business with application which involves stream analytics or batch or sensors, that we have a ready kind of blueprint that that people understand, yeah, it fits under this scenario. That's how we're going to set up our data warehouse, the data engineering, the data pipelines. The key challenges here is around cloud, because some of the applications we are involved in, they are massive. The other day, there is a file of 7 terabytes, one single file that needs to be manipulated by several peoples over different geographical locations. Just uploading that to a cloud environment and trying to manage that, it's horrific, and especially in Australia, where then you don't have the same bandwidth. Australia seems to be a bit disconnected from the fast global network by the sounds of it, because we always get issues there. But more importantly, the cloud costing model, because at the moment, the on-prem costs, the on-prem facilities are run by IT and charged on an annual basis to a management fee that's split across the whole business. When we move to a cloud costing model, it's a direct costing model, which means it becomes very, very clear costs are, and they get cross-charged to the respective business unit. So suddenly they're saying, hang on, Frederic, I thought cloud is cheap. Cloud is damn expensive. No, it is cheaper. It's just you never had the visibility on the real cost of your on-prem facility. The fourth capability is around data transformation. You may probably be surprised to see that in here, but let me explain why. Because of our history, most of the data wrangling has been done very locally with Excel, in ways that are not repetitive, not documented. There's all sorts of language being used. We have people doing coding in VBA, in SQL, in Scala, in R, Python, everything under the sun you find somewhere in RPS. And also, in addition, when I talk to our data scientists and analysts, they spend 75% of the time nothing else than wrangling with very antiquated and manual processes. So there's a lot of efficiency to be gained by providing them with more training, with better tools, and also to centralize some of the transformation, especially the complex one, using much more powerful tools than Excel. The key challenge, of course, is again cost and also the complexity, because we can't just lift and shift their VBA or their macros, into our environment without significant help from the subject matter expert, because it was not documented, and some are extremely fantastically complex. Some of the algorithms running on the Oceansize project, I mean, it takes the on-prem sometimes about 9 hours to run the query, to run all the calculations. So they are significant complex routines. Master data management, I won't dwell too much on this because it's quite obvious, but given where we are, we don't have really a good handle on master data. We have different systems in play. We are moving now to a single global systems, and they will become the master in their own respect. So we are moving over the next couple of years to a single global ERP platform for finance and project accounting. We will have, we move to an central HR system, CRM. But in the short term, the only way I can kind of mimic master data is by using my middleware, using the enterprise data warehouse, and unify as best as I can to create 360-degree views. But it's not really a full master data management solution. It's too costly to consider anything else, and it doesn't make sense in the context of the journey we are on. The next one is data quality management. I'm not going to dwell too much on this because we will have an interesting session tomorrow with Julian and Tim. But look, like any business, I still have to work in a business that honestly can say that data is absolutely perfect and fit for purpose. And it's mainly driven that data requirements change all the time. You're always playing catch up, but also very often companies are not really taking a systematic approach to data quality management. And that's my desire, is to put some more processes in place and to work through the data governance framework to agree on measures for data quality, and then my team to centrally report on data quality indicators and drive that into the data governance framework to then hopefully encourage them to take note and action. Now, quantifying the cost of bad data is always easier said than done, especially in my context. And also it's business resource intensive because it's the data, it's their data, they own it, they should be correcting it. But again, if they have to choose between winning business, delivering business, or sticking a few plasters here and there, they will go for the plasters, trust me. We're nearly there. So the next one is data skills, data literacy. The reason why is because in my environment, we are dealing with new technology. We are rolling out cloud, we are rolling out, Azure, new tools. So I need to be careful that we are not running too fast and not having enough knowledge and technical skills in IT to actually configure and manage those new systems. So there's a big focus at the moment on Azure training and accreditations, but also in the business. As I said before, my model is a hybrid model. I am pushing more ownership and more data processing activity to the outskirts of the business. That also means there's a wider pool of people involved that also need to have the right skills and the right approach. So we are using Teams, a lot Teams channel. For instance, we have a team channel for Power BI that we set up recently to join all those that we have identified as super users to develop local solutions. We've got a community of practice going for advanced analytics and AI, which joins globally the more advanced analysts, and we meet quarterly in a global call to discuss, what we're doing, share good practice, and sometimes I bring in an external presenter to present what other companies are doing or what Microsoft is doing in this space. The key challenges are obviously the matrix working and the lack of time and resource for training. Training is always one that's set on the back burner if resources are tight. And finally, data access and security. So access here means accessing data, and what I'm putting in place, I'm basically moving from a current situation where a lot of colleagues need to go to different solutions, different places to get their information. I'm moving towards developing a single BI portal, a Power BI portal. Power BI will be used not just for dashboard reporting, but also we are using it for curating data sets. So we will centrally prepare data. It will have the stamp saying, yeah, it's centrally verified, it conforms to our standard, and they can go and find it through the Power BI portal. And some users will be allowed to do their own calculation, ad hoc analysis of that data instead of using the pre-canned reporting and dashboards. We're also looking at geodata library because a lot of our data is geographical, identified data. We deal with a lot of sensitive data, and that has caught me a little bit by surprise because it has given quite some really, really complex challenges because of the matrix working, and that also need to translate into making sure that data is kept secure. We deal with MOD, we deal with other sensitive clients. We are following the ISO 27001 standard in some part of the business. We try to widen that to other parts of the business. So row-level security, which is now available in what we're building, we will rely heavily on that to control access. And security, funnily enough, data security is not part of my remit, but of course I work very closely together with my with the head of security on making sure that we keep, everything secure. So that's the 8 data management capabilities, which I know it's a lot to take in, and I'm rushing through quite quickly. But hopefully that's going to be of use and give you some food for thought for your own situations. These are some of the services that I'm centrally making available. Some of these are in place. Some of them you might be surprised, like data cleansing. Why would do that centrally? If you say that data is owned by the business, they should clean it. But in my view, sometimes it makes sense to do it centrally because of the volume, the complexity we have. We can script things much easier than some of the less technical end users. We also have Power Apps capability in my team, which has come handy already in one project where we had to develop a mobile app to capture data in the field. We are looking at cognitive AI services, which are accessible through Azure, and helping the organization with rolling that out. And obviously, I have an information governance manager who leads on GDPR, and also myself. I spend, unfortunately, 20-25% of my own time helping with data compliance, hands-on, because there's quite a lot of work in that. But this gives you a little bit of a flavor of what kind of my shop window looks like in RPS. And important to mention that what we have agreed is that I don't cross-charge the business for proof of concepts or proof of values, but I do charge when they win the tender. So if they're saying, look, Frederic, can you design a Power BI complex visual as part of a tender? We won't charge them. So that's part of overhead, and ultimately they will still indirectly cover that through the management fee. However, when they win the business and then we need to get involved to build the full solution and to operate, that's when we then cross-charge the business. So, and the reason why I've done that, even though finance was a bit against it, is because I want to encourage innovation. I don't want internal cost and budget to play a role in people being able to use the resources that I have and try new things. So what has the progress so far been in the first 6 months? Because the financial year started in January, and so we're 6 months in now. Of course, COVID has, given us quite a bit of challenges. The biggest challenge is that I basically have no budget anymore left in this year. So I had to put on the back burner the acquisition of some data quality, metadata solutions, data catalog. So we're trying to see whether we can build anything in-house or try to address this in a different matter. But I'm very proud of how quickly I've been able to recruit a really good team. And how we've set out very quickly a good level of pace and recognition already. Data governance framework has been developed and approved, and I'm in the process of setting up the first data steering group. Power BI capability established in 3 geographical areas where we deploy this hybrid model, and 5 reporting projects delivered by my team directly. We have the Azure Modern Data Warehouse in place, but most importantly, we have so far been involved in supporting 5 tenders, of which 2 we won. And we've also supported 3 machine learning proof of concept delivered to clients around worldwide. We've got the global community of practice in place, which I referred to earlier, and we are also, quite ahead on schedule in terms of the review of GDPR, because a lot was done 2 years ago, as you can imagine, but it's time to refresh, to review, and especially to raise the awareness again. And we have developed a really good campaign, including a new intranet page, which we are going to be rolling out in July. We're almost at the end. Before concluding, I just want to share kind of 5 lessons learned, which I hope will be useful for you or give you some food of thought. And forgive me, I'm a big Dilbert fan, so you will see that I like using Dilbert to get some points across. The first one is around managing expectations from the onset. When you especially arrive in your business as a data leader or even an IT leader, there's so much expectations. And very often they expect technology to resolve all the problems. But often it's not about technology, that's the easy bit. It's about, you know, the processes, behaviors, the data itself. And I would say, you know, it's garbage in, garbage out. And sometimes you have to make that clear. And people get it, but they often forget about it. Also, is about managing expectation in terms of proof of value, what a prototype is. I have been in situations whereby I show them the art of the possible, and suddenly they go off and start selling already to a client without us having done the assessment whether we can actually develop that and scale it up in a profitable, in a cost-effective way. So in the same vein, you know, don't show your clients what you cannot scale up. The second one, which you'll probably find a bit odd, which I call dating. As a data leader, you have to become proficient in dating. And the reason why I'm saying so is because although, yes, I'm in my mid-40s and I haven't been dating and on the dating scene for a long time, but if you think about dating, it's all about getting to know the other person to see whether you get on, whether you like her. So what do? You ask loads of questions, you try to understand what keeps them awake at night, what they're in, you show empathy, you project yourself in a positive way because you want obviously that person to look positive at you, if of course you like the person, but also you can't push too hard too soon in your dating setup because otherwise they will, you know, run away. And that's very similar to my daily job because I have to engage with a lot of stakeholders, and I feel sometimes it's like dating because I need to ask a lot of questions to really deeply understand what their main issues are, what keeps them awake at night. I need to show empathy, but also I can't push too hard. I need to push hard, and I want to change, I want to influence, I want to convince and persuade them. But if I overdo it, they will get really defensive and I miss my opportunity, and I need to leave them alone for 6 months or so before I can re-engage. Ultimately, it's about becoming a critical trust colleague and taking a win-win mentality and celebrating success together. So hopefully you see the analogy. The third lesson learned is don't assume data literacy. Probably you on the call are, you know, given who's organizing this, you're most likely from an IT background or a business background with a very good understanding of IT. But not everybody understands data. Not everybody is technology savvy. And as a result, don't assume that they will understand data. You know, communicate, repeat, spend enough time on training, mentoring, and make it interesting. Data is dull. I mean, I can probably put most of my audience RPS asleep in seconds when I talk about data governance, but you need to bring it to life. Visually, you need to use some humor, diagrams, flow charts, and develop a common language. Make sure that you have a business glossary that reflects terms that the people can really understand. The fourth one is that the proof is in the pudding. Yes, it's nice to develop strategy, and a lot has been read and said about that, but if you don't deliver results, you're not going to succeed. Results is what counts. And it comes back to my earlier point about the balance between strategic. Yes, you need to take a strategic approach. You need to really think and making sure you ultimately get to where you want to, but please don't forget, it's also about delivering in the here and now and focus on what works for you. I have learned a lot by listening to, you know, other peers, by involved in these type of sessions, by reading, by looking at Gartner, by looking at so many other sources, but ultimately you have to find something that works for you in your situation, in your organization. I can't stand here and pretend that what I do here is going to be perfect for you. Not at all. We all have to pick things and try new things and learn from others, but more importantly, learn from failure. I have learned far more from failing than my successes. And I've also learned not to repeat failure. And in my team, I have encouraged a culture of failure. I have no problem with them trying and failing as long as they learn out of it and they don't bloody repeat it. And finally, coming back to my original point, how I started, don't forget your data foundation. There's a lot of focus, a lot of pressure to focus on the shiny AI, machine learning, all the stuff. Look what other companies are doing. Frederic, why can't we do that? The reality is, if you haven't got the foundation sorted, you are going to fail. You are going to be one of the future stats of Harvard Business Review or Gartner, because whether you like it or not, it all starts with data. And if you haven't got a good basis to collect, process, enrich, and make the data available, you are going to fail. So you need to make sure you have that foundation. That's my key takeaway from today. And Finally, my most favorite quote from Ronald: "If you torture the data long enough, it will confess to anything." Thank you very much for listening. Feel free to connect, and hopefully this has given you some food for thought, and we will open up for questions. But I have also some questions for you in case if you don't have any, which is all about, because I would like to learn more about how mature your organization is. My approach is one of the many. What's yours? And do you think I've missed anything? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frederic. That was really, really insightful, and it's amazing to see lots of data being managed on such a large scale and across so many different complexities within the different groups. So we've got quite a few questions here, so I'm gonna run through those. And starting off with one of my own. First off, so you talk about, you mentioned matrix working as a challenge, and on such a large scale across a lot of groups, how do you navigate the human element, particularly in respect of getting senior stakeholders on board?
That's a good question, because of being a global business and being a central function, the additional complexity matrix working is also that you tend to deal with people in the States and Australia 9 hours ahead or 7 hours behind. So it's also practically an issue. But matrix working, I guess the key challenge is that you need to be at any time be aware of if you pull resources for a specific matrix project, that they ultimately are reporting to different people. They're not reporting to you permanently. You need to be aware of what their priorities are. Of course, if their priority is to support you, helping to deliver something, that's fine. But you always have to be mindful that there might also be under pressure for other priorities that you don't necessarily have visibility, visibility of. And for me, the matrix working, my experience has told me that you need to be realistic. You need to set clear expectations of the rules of engagement, what good and not good looks like. And you need to respect each other's constraints. For instance, I'm in a matrix set up for a CRM project, which combines UK colleagues and Australia, and we have agreed on the timescales when it's appropriate to contact and to set up meetings and when it isn't. So some practical arrangements, but also we make sure that we all pull in the same direction, and that we also are clear when we need people, because you don't need people full time. I have a specific need of a skill set in Ireland, but I don't need them full time. I just make it clear by planning very well and using tools like DevOps to make sure that we're all clear what we have to deliver when, what the interdependencies are.
Great. Thank you very much. That's really helpful and useful insights in managing those complexities and getting that buy-in. So thank you for that. The next question we've got, so there's a saying here that to the person with a hammer, every problem is a nail. So the question is that how do you objectively diagnose the problems that exist in different parts without any bias?
Yeah. It's ultimately by understanding the wider context of the problem. I know it's obvious, but when somebody comes to you with a problem, it's about, okay, tell me why is it a problem? How does it impact you? And then you have to compare that with, as I said several times in my presentation, it is a matter of being absolutely aligned to what the business is focusing on, being in tune with the right business leaders to ensure that you fully understand their strategy, their plans. Because if I get approached to help resolve a problem, which I don't personally see the link with the direction of travel, then I challenge that. Then I kind of trying to say, can you articulate a little bit how this problem fits in what your unit is trying to do? Because correct me if I'm wrong, I've seen your unit strategy and plan, your focus is on this, etc. So that's one way, is to understand the wider context and to make sure that you take an objective view. And a problem is a problem. Ultimately you have to prioritize what you focus on and what you support, but you need to be able to justify that. And how I justify that is by reverting back to the agreed strategy and business plans. That's my objective hook, because Otherwise, who am I to judge that your problem is more important to resolve than another one if I haven't got that link? So yeah, it's in a nutshell, really deeply understanding the problem, how it impacts the business, and how the impact relates to what they're trying to achieve, their strategy and their plans.
Great, and I suppose definitely linked to that is do you see that there's any potential, or you know, how do you deal with any sort of bias towards a kind of narrow range of tools and solutions on to that effect as well?
Yeah, that is a challenge, but you can imagine how many solutions we have in play, given that the company originates from all the acquisitions. So, for instance, I had people already bought into Tableau, while our plan is to roll out Microsoft Power BI. We have ClickView in place. We have various platforms in place. Cloud is the same. We are going down the Microsoft route, but we have in some pockets, Google Cloud and Amazon Web Services in play. And sometimes people really struggle with change, but at the end of the day, it's about, again, I tend to come from a common sense approach, in the sense that, look, let's first focus on what our requirements are, and both functional and non-functional requirement, and let's just compare solutions. So to give an illustration, one of the projects I'm involved in is evaluating 2 CRM solutions. And we are running campaigns through, it's CRM stroke marketing solutions, and we are running a proof of value through both of them with different people. And obviously you can see already how some people are starting to become biased to their own solution, but it's about making sure that out of the experience we come saying, okay, what is the absolute must have? What functionality do we need? And then really objectively look at the solution, saying, okay, is that solution better in dealing with that or not? What is the time it will take to get users to onboard on the solution? What the interface like, and all the different requirements. So yeah, there's always bias. Ultimately, I have, of course, we all have bias. I mean, I have worked with other solutions as well, and yeah, you sometimes dream, wouldn't it be nice to bring some of the solutions from my previous work in this one? But the context is different, the situation is different, the requirements are different, and I find it very important to take a objective, matter-of-fact approach, and try to get emotions out of it. And I challenge people sometimes in saying, well, that's, explain me, why is that solution better? In what way? So yeah.
Yeah, lots of challenges there, and as you say, it's it's about the approach and making sure that those right questions are asked at the right time. So that's really helpful. So in terms of the cloud, you've mentioned kind of scaling up and looking at cloud. So whilst a lot of firms are actually focused on the cloud, there are a lot of risks around data loss and those kind of things. So one of the questions is around whether RPS has thought about anonymizing the data that's stored in the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, obviously for sensitive and personal information, we do look very carefully at security, and we have a 5-strong information security team that evaluates any vendor and any solution, and that's also why we tend to stick to the well-known providers. Because sometimes you can't go wrong with them because of the amount of resources and the fact that their environment is often much more secure than your own on-prem. But it is an ever-evolving beast and challenge, because as we become more and more connected, as we deploy more and more software as a service, platform as a service, you become exposed to different risks. But I don't see this as necessarily the reason why we just should put everything on prem. But yes, there are ways around it. So we make sure that we are anonymizing where possible. And a good example is, we are in the context of delivering a central HR system. We have to create a middleware, and we need to bring data from local HR systems through a middleware into the new system. And we are bringing the data in, obviously encrypted. We are masking the personal aspect of it, so we use new keys, and then try to make sure that middleware is not accessible except by 2 or 3 developers. So we do everything we can to make sure we are compliant and that we are having a secure environment. But there's risk in anything, and we had not so long time ago one of our on-prem systems being hacked, or trying to be hacked in, and to be honest, yeah, you have the same risk as cloud, but and that's why you need to make sure that your contracts with the vendors, that everything is ticked off, and get some of the information security specialists involved in really, really vetting that all the measures they have put in place are indeed the right ones.
Excellent, thank you. And this kind of links on in a way this question, which is around how you keep your view of the RPS's evolving priorities in each business unit and location up to date. Obviously, there's lots of challenges around that, which you're obviously just discussing now and answering in some of those questions. But it's really to get your view on that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can't stay on top of everything, especially in such a fragmented business, but it's about contacting and being aligned to the right people. So I spent quite a bit of time last year to travel around to meet people face to face, which is good because obviously with COVID now, that's completely a no-go at the moment. So we're all working from home, as most of you probably in the same boat, and there's no global travel, international travel permitted at the moment. However, it's about, identifying who are the shakers and movers, who really are the influential people. They're not necessarily the most senior, it's the people who really get things moving. You rely on people who have been there before to say, look, who is the best person to introduce me into this area, into this business unit. And we have also kind of a briefing session. So in IT, we have peers. I have peers of mine that are aligned to specific segments, and they attend the segment monthly meetings with the senior leadership in the respective segment, and they actually pick up a lot of new insight and pass it on to the rest of IT. So it's good that I don't have to rely on my own attending all these sessions or my team spending their valuable time in all these meetings. We've got a setup in IT, which means we have close engagement. We have we organize ourselves in such a way that, and so I have to rely on a lot of my colleagues to feedback about any new ideas. And also by becoming more visible and delivering, people now know where to find me. So I noticed, especially the last 3 months, that I get approached far more direct from even people I've never met. It's just other people talking, saying, well, if you've got this problem, why don't you talk to Frederic? He joined, the IT team as CDO, etc., etc.
Yeah, that's great. And as you say, it's a job to establish yourself and make the role and the importance known. And I think just sort of following on from that, as you mentioned, you are placed within the function of the IT team. And do you feel the function would be better placed actually within the business?
Yeah. I honestly think I shouldn't be in IT, because I often be seen as an IT problem. Data is not an IT problem, it's a business problem. But it is what it is. I mean, in our, because the CEO has already got about 9 or 10 direct reports, there was a decision made at some stage, before I came on board, that actually let's park the CDO under the group CIO. It has its advantages because obviously, whether you like it or not, data sits in, if you think about it, the CIO is all about the plumbing, all the systems, and then I have the stuff for what what earlier today was said, the box and the eggs, isn't it? They care about the box, I care about the eggs and making sure they're not going off. But I have to admit that in the past I have reported to a COO, and that was for me a much better position to be in. I was far more effective and impactful when I was reporting to COO than a CIO. But look, it is what it is. You have to make the most out of it. And like anything, it has pros and cons. I have very quick access to obviously technical resources. I'm very much proactively involved in decisions made there that have an impact on data management, and they get myself and my team involved in some of the work they're doing. But yes, it's not ideal.
No, and I suppose another question that's been posed, and it links on quite nicely to this, is around the data privacy aspect and your operating model, and whether you have it. You talked about the data compliance team, but is that completely independent, and are there any kind of challenges around that? Because you're obviously in, are there any conflicts between the need to comply and actually the need to get the most out of the data?
Yeah. It's interesting because we don't need a DPO, from a GDPR point of view, because we are not processing that much consumer personal information besides staff data and obviously customer data, but we're not in the game of a high volume. And we did check with the ICO a couple of years ago, and I've seen the evidence that they advise, yeah, you don't need DPO. However, they have chosen that our company secretary to be the most senior responsible for data, because he sits on the board and has direct access to the CEO. And as a result, he is ultimately the most senior. I'm operationally the most senior, and I'm responsible for making it work, making sure things happen, that risks are mitigated against, and obviously escalating as I need, as I see fit. I deal with the day in, day out. And to give you an idea, for this size of organization, it's only myself, a quarter of my time, and one other person full time. We have lost another person, which we can't replace at the moment. Hopefully, when COVID clears up, I will have another resource to recruit, because it is, we are sinking under all the requirements around GDPR and all the project that needs data privacy, impact assessment, etc. But it is right, because sometimes, because I manage, I'm responsible for some of the data management infrastructure. I need to, support different innovative ways of using data. You can't be seen as gamekeeper and poacher at the same time. So yes, there is a duality in the sense that, yeah, chief data officers tend to be also DPOs, but then you have to be really careful that you can take an objective view and not getting muddled up between the two roles. So, but in my situation, I'm not DPO, but I'm responsible for data governance. And yes, it does mean that I have to tell my own people off sometimes for pushing the boat a bit too far, to saying, hang on, it's not really compliant, or, or you're running in a risk, not to be able to justify this way of processing data.
Yeah, that's really interesting and challenging, and as you say, it's a difficult balance to achieve, but well, not impossible. But there's a few more questions here that I'd like to just get through, and that's really around that they're kind of linked in a way. So we'll start with the data management maturity model, and what level you feel that the RPS is at now, and what level you're hoping to achieve in the coming years.
Yeah, so I would say that, I use the popular 5-level scale, and I would say they're either level 1 or 2. They're definitely not in a managed, repeatable state for most of it. So it's obviously very, on a group level, it's difficult to generalize. I do have a view as part of my strategy deck that I had to present to the board, where I take a group view, but it's very hard, because as soon as I see it, they say, oh, hang on, my area is a bit more mature than this, blah, blah, blah. So it's difficult. You need to go down to the business unit level. But what I have done is I've kind of put a roadmap together whereby, year 1, this year, is about building the foundation and dealing with the most pertinent high-risk areas, and then stabilization, and then moving to a center of excellence in year 3. And for the business units now, we have articulated for most of them, not all of them, that's still work in progress, what are the key tasks they're going to take on to move them towards at least a 3. We are not aspiring to be a 5. We are, sometimes good is good enough and moving the dial in the right place. But for instance, on aspects like data compliance, data security, data access, we are aiming for a 4. But for some of the areas like data transformation, a 3 is good enough. So it's all about, recognizing where they are now and being realistic in how much progress you can make, and relating it back to the business area and what it's trying to do, and how important it's in the context of the business in terms of revenue, in terms of risk, and everything else.
Excellent, thank you. And just really, there's just a couple more questions, and there's actually a response to one of the questions you asked yourself earlier. So, in terms of the legacy data, there's some questions around whether you face very old data media, and also, and the challenges of that, and also assuming across the locations of the groups, there's potentially multiple or duplicate copies of data. And do you have a strategy to harvest that and preserve that?
Yeah. Now, it's a good question, because I tend to be always trying to be a perfectionist, and I get really fed up when I see missed opportunities. But I have to learn in this role to be just happy to be, or you know, to be comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. Because to give you an idea, we have 20 years of ocean science data locked up in Perth, and it's on tapes. You know, how the hell are you going to extract, you know, the cost and the effort of getting, you know, some of the takes and even some of the data is in fishes, as we call it, you know, the English word for it, but it's not in a format that you can easily, you know, get into a cloud and share. And you just have to accept it is what it is, and it doesn't make sense from a business point of view, because the value, yes, you can get more, definitely more value out of it, but it's not to this, to the order that of the cost and the effort. So, you know, you have to weigh up what's the benefit of bringing the data together. And because the company is so diverse and in terms of activity, there are definitely opportunities in the short term and we are working on unifying some of the data to see how far we can push it. But I also have to be realistic that there's not much point of trying to merge data from the mining team, you know, with the occupational health lab that focus on blood samples, etc. You know, so you need to use your common sense that there are synergies to be had, but there are also areas where it doesn't make sense. You know, stop worrying about it, because the likelihood you find a nugget of gold is going to be very slim. So I know it's a bit of an odd answer, but you know, it is what it is. You know, that there's so much legacy. It sits in, you know, you can't really do much with it, or you have to spend a fortune on it. So my focus is more about going forward. How can I put processes, systems in place to avoid our data, you know, going to a swamp, avoid that it gets duplicated and everything else. Because the data is all fragmented, I don't have a tool that can scan all the different, you know, local health sources and everything and index it beautifully and tag it and present on a plate. That, unfortunately, I don't have a magic wand. But what I'm trying to do is be comfortable, you know, knowing that there's a lot of garbage in the legacy systems and a lot of opportunities, but it's about saying, okay, you know, let's focus on the future, which I can influence, by making sure we have the right systems, process and behaviors in place. And once the system is up and running, if there is opportunity to then migrate some of the old stuff in the new with minimal effort, and it is again aligned to the direction of travel, there's clear opportunity, then we will do that. But at the moment, I haven't seen too many opportunities, you know, around digitizing some of the 20-year-old legacy data.
No, that's great, thank you. And I suppose really around the sort of centralized approach that you're taking, has that removed to a degree the data silos?
It's not. I mean, I'm taking a hybrid approach, so I'm focusing, like for instance, data governance. I strongly feel needs to be led from the central core. Some of the more complex, you know, the infrastructure, the architecture. You don't want to duplicate these expensive technical resources. You don't want to have completely different Wild West out there in terms of cloud architecture, data warehouses, etc. So that will minimize by forcing the business to use the new centrally provided infrastructure will indeed minimize silos, because I will have far better visibility. So for instance, we are at the moment testing our new environment with two use cases. There are two use cases where typically the data would be held locally. Now it's going into the central data lake, and we're deploying Synapse, you know, to deal with the transformation and presenting that back to the business in a usable format. So the whole idea is that we will bring more and more data, both for client projects as well as internally, into our, you know, central enterprise environment. Make sure what goes in gets properly documented and metadata managed using the data catalog solution, for instance, so that at least going forward, as we bring data in, we have visibility, we know what's there, we can easily retrieve it, find it, and make that available through business glossary and data catalog to the business. So that's kind of the strategy. Yes, to answer your question, some of that central way of working will indeed break down the silos, but it will not necessarily completely negate it. You know, I only know what I know, and there's so much activity going on we are trying to close down the doors for them to buy and build their own. So for instance, any Power BI license needs to get my approval. And the reason is not because I'm a control freak. It's because I want to understand, why do you need Power BI? What are they going to do with it? Is for client work? We have premium capacity. They don't understand that. They buy licenses, spend money on licenses which they don't really need. And I've learned a lot by just being in that process of approval, because I pick up the phone, no matter who it is, and saying, oh, tell me a bit more what you do. What are your key challenges? You know, what are you planning to do with Power BI? I then link them with our team site to make sure that then they're aware there's some useful training videos, material. I connect them to my Power BI guru in my team for any bespoke training. And again, I'm saying, look, we can set up a workspace in our premium capacity for you and give you a pro license. So let's work together. Let's work according to our standards and in our environment. So again, it's a service. We make it available. You need to play ball, but you have now more capable solutions. So that's a good example of how I'm trying to break down the silos by putting some processes in place to make sure that I have better visibility on what people are doing.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. There's lots and lots of takeaways there, lots of really good questions coming in, and some really, you know, robust and sound practices to think about and take away. But just in response to the question that you asked yourself, Frederic, in terms of, you know, what do people call data governance? And we've got one comment here that colleagues visibly winced at the phrase of data governance, and actually what they ended up doing was they grew through acquisition and had lots of overlap with their need for alignment, but they actually ended up calling it data collaboration and accountability. There's no more detail around that as to, you know, how that went and where they're at now, but just thought I'd mention that in response to your question. But,
that's really good, and if that colleague is still on the call, I don't mind them picking up, and you know, because I'm really honestly really keen to talk to other peers to say, okay, you know, I'm really keen to learn from others how they get around this, because it's my perpetual problem. I've introduced data governance a few times now, and it's the hardest nut in my 8 data management capability model to really properly embed. And I know there's a lot of textbooks and a lot of theory about it, and organizations, but the reality is always different than what you read in the books. So if that colleague is still on, if that's, you know, that person is still on the call, feel free to reach out to LinkedIn and continue that, because I like that idea.
Lovely, that's perfect. Well, I think that concludes the questions. I just want to thank you and thank all of our attendees. It's been really insightful and a really good session today. So don't forget, if you want to, you can view the recording, and thank you very much.